Oh, good afternoon, everyone. Just a little late with today's movie problems, but not anything terrible. It's nice to be making another video back in the USA. Um, and we have a book of different flavor. This time I chose it to put it in this order. One of the reasons was we do have another nice, strong character, Laura Brown. Kind of reminds me a little bit, she's snarky, uh, of a little bit of the, I'm trying to remember the name of the movie about the young girl who becomes pregnant, but at any rate, she's sassy. Uh, and it'd be nice for you for contrasts, as the discussion thread indicates, with our leading character from the trilogy, Katniss Everdeen. As I said, somewhere one of them totes a bow and arrow, and this one plays a nice bass guitar in I love the name of the band that she's in, the Dirty Angels. I think they say "Death to Capitalist Scum," and I like the idea. Says we're gonna puke all over your pretty lives. So at any rate, a different tone, a different country, as a matter of fact, Great Britain, and something else, a couple other things to bear in mind. This book takes a year, and it's a diary form. It's another first-person account. Um, and the diary form has a sense of immediacy about it, as in she just wrote it. That's the fiction. Whereas the other book we read, I told you the first-person account in this particular case, offers you a nice way to look at the experiencing uh, character versus the experienced one who's supposedly writing the first person account. This one, through the sense of immediacy that an diary form gives you, you feel a certain intimacy with the character. You know, I mean, the idea here is that you wouldn't lie to your own diary, if you will. And so that, you know, we get the sense that it's happening right as we're reading it or shortly thereafter and things along those lines. You know, she'll even talk about things like, well, I'm writing this now because the light's this way and that way. So pay attention to that. You will see in a year's time lots of things change. The other sort of a thing here that's more of the immediacy is a lot of the dystopian novels will start the way we see in Hunger Games. This is to say 200 years in the future, uh, or something like this, in 75 years of the Hunger Games, since the dark days after the revolution, if you will, or I should say the Civil War. And at any rate, this one's supposed to happen in 2015. So the issues that are dealt with are very, in a sense, contemporary. We're in another country, Great Britain. Uh, Now, some of the language may puzzle you a little bit here and there. You know, they keep talking about Ibiza. It looks like Ibiza, Ibiza. Ibiza, Kim goes there. And this is a place where a lot of British go. It's an island by Mallorca that is off the coast of Spain. It's beautiful weather, and it's a nice place to visit if you ever get a chance. At any rate, that's, you know, you'll pick up these kinds of things, and you know, but otherwise, pay attention as you're reading it. I mean, what this does show you is that it just because it's a dystop, excuse just because it's a dystopian novel, it doesn't have to be incredibly depressing all the time. And after a very kind of depressing, the third book the uh, in the Hunger Games trilogy, Mockingjay is quite tragic and not happy, happy, happy. In this particular case, you have the problem of the world happening as it does, the great storm, and now we have what the Carbon Diary is a reference to. 2015 is the year that it takes place. She writes for a year, and it's also about what's going on with carbon, which would be fossil fuels and things along these lines, and very serious issues such as global warming that brings about drought and also more rain than usual, and the way that you want to keep an eye on the way that it affects people. Now, again, it's fiction. But we also see it through we experience or get references to what's going on through the experiences of this young lady. Um, who has boy problems. She has Ravi and Addie, as you're going to find out and pay attention in there. Um, these, I mean, it's a very much typical adolescent, okay? And we're used to that because these are the characters we're going to have throughout our novels. But I think you'll find her pretty funny and disarming. She has a funny family. The crisis comes and it affects everybody in different kinds of ways. I mean, she just really is a typical teenager. She doesn't pay attention as much as she should in school, pay attention to what's taught at school. And also, her friend Ams, AIMs, who's in uh, her cousin, her mother's sister's child writes her, so we learn a little bit of what's happening in the United States. You learn what's going on in Europe because of the news and the television when it's on, and you have interesting characters, of course, and they're in London basically, and how um, crises affect what goes on. There was a movie years ago called Threads, which is entirely depressing about what happens to civilization after a nuclear war. And Threads has to do with this idea of how fragile civilization actually is. And you'll have a lot of references to that. You say, oh my gosh, we're going back to the Middle Ages. My father just got a job driving a vegetable cart with a horse. Um, and someone will say, well, it's like we're Middle Ages now, or the one woman GPJ, who's grows in the estimation of our narrator Laura throughout the book. She's kind of funny in places, but pay attention to her. As she at one point says, we are a third world country now because of the energy crisis, but also because of environmental catastrophe. Um, and so pay attention to what's going on, and the turmoil of the young girl will also reflect it. But you can pick up on these important notions that inform the novel. And you have some really interesting characters, too, to give perspective. For instance, Arthur Stote Wilson is a very aristocratic sounding name. He also can give away carbon credits because of the way he lives. But he is 89 years old, and so we have his perspective of having lived through wars, world wars. At one point, he says, everything's horrible. At least we're not having a war. But pay attention because there's big problems. There's two years of drought in northern Africa, so there's immigration problems coming over to Europe. The fires, water fight wars are starting. So there's a serious chance of just horrible, horrible, catastrophic things happening. You have a bunch of new vocabulary. I love the carbon offenders recovery program, and of course the carbon dating that the the gay hairdresser starts. What is his name? I have it here. Kiriani. But again, Arthur, pay attention to Arthur in there, okay? Because that puts things in another perspective. And then you have that crazy family with Sister Kim and the mother and father. I think that I can just see her rolling her eyes at some of the things that go on. But pay attention to them because, of course, they're in many ways a typical family that the teenager thinks that they're, as they would say, barking dog mad is another London phrase. They say, how bad is he? He's barking crazy. She thinks they are. I love, for instance, they get a pig. Uh, and I love the name Philip Larkin. And like Kim says, oh, he's that poet that writes about, you know, parents and how horrible they are and things like that. Philip Larkin's an actual name, and Larkin is the pig. Um, and I just read you this one comment. I'm not going to tell you everything that happens in the story or anything. He's a beauty, ain't he? The dad's drinking a little bit and traded in the mother's sob for a pig and a bunch of other things that are useful now. I mean, this is the whole idea of to change and how it affects everything. And you know, I mean, poor girl just wants things the way they used to be. I went indoors. What is happening to fathers? The way mine's heading, he's going to turn into one of those crazy American backwoods survivalists. You know, the ones that have to send the U.S. Marines to hunt down and kill. His brain's gone dually. No way do pigs and shit add up to Saab hybrid convertible. It's just really bad maths. I'll come home one day and he'll be chewing tobacco dressed in an old Vietnam vet suit, timing himself as he strips down an AK-47 and makes plans to sell me to his friend's cousin. These are the kinds of things that she says that I think you'll find just delightful. But remember, you can accomplish some serious things with humor. So in the backdrop, you have the real serious issues, and what happens to her reinforces through humor a lot of the times, and then through other things like I said, boy problems. Um, you have a 60% reduction in carbon in the beginning. You know, 1 year of crisis. Um, as I said, the dystopian humor. Keep that in mind. Also, her band's kind of fun to the lyrics of the songs. You know, about capitalist scum and things along these lines. Um, Addie and Ravi, the two boys, and Ravi's family, and also the neighborhood. The whole neighborhood is interesting. This is a loud father, I think is one of the characters, mousy woman, and you have the Indian family next door, uh, and their kind of relationship of the parents is pretty damn funny, as you're going to come to find out. You have the Leader's family, Tracy Leader, and those that were involved in, well, as you'll discover, they scare the hell out of everybody in the neighborhood. Uh, Watch them because of black market kind of things that go on when the usual um, system crumbles. There's always a black market. As there is in places like Cuba. There is in the United States too, but it's not like a separate economy the way it is in places like Cuba and, of course, a lot of other countries where there's political instability and a lot of poverty. Um, Let me see if there were any other specific things that I wanted to get into with this story, but there aren't. I don't need to give you a long introduction, but do think when you're looking at it about dystopia and what a story like this can do. Um, as I said, there are serious issues here, and our characters confront them. Um, and so pay attention to that. You know, how even though there's a lot of humor, it's a funny story. It does deal with, again, uses and abuse of technology, you name it, government control, government privatizing things like the power grid, and what are some of the possible consequences. I mean, a lot of the things she brings up in here about things like it's built along the Thames River to try to give you protection from surges, tidal surges. What she writes about there, you can read about. I didn't look up any of the other bands to see if they were really like the Hydrogen or contemporary names. I forgot to do that. You might do that. But this idea of what goes on in a single slim volume, and think in terms of a lot of the issues that were raised in the 3 books you've just finished, because we're going to find a recurrence of a lot of these. Um, Now, the other thing I'm going to do a little bit later in the week is to give you a format and a longer discussion about the midterm that's coming up next week. Okay, so be watching the blog and the announcement page for some updates. I've given you already um, a link to the exam that was taken um, um, last semester and the year before, but used the same books. So, and I put the format you're going to follow is identical to that. Basically, you're going to have 5 prompts. I'll make each one give a either or an or. It might be a character's name, it might be a quotation. Um, and what you want to do is write 6 to 8 sentences for these 5 prompts. Now I'll make a pool of about 15 or 10 or 12, something along in there. And so everybody will basically get a different test. Now, you have to take this test in one sitting, okay? You want to think in terms of the significance of something like rue. Uh, you want to narrow things down a bit, or something along those lines, and you'll have choices, either ors and things like that, okay? Um, Now, 6 to 8 sentences at least. My advice is that you do 2 things. One, you may not know the prompts for the class from the regular class, but look at the way they're answered, and there's also comments from me. They're all, I wouldn't put up horrible examples. They're pretty good. And you'll see that I've done about 8 or 9 of them. You get a feel for what you want to do. It's not just tell me who Rue is. You want to write, talk to her about her in terms of the importance for the big ideas of the novel, and also the importance for, let's say, Katniss. You have a lot of political things going on, things along those lines. So you want to not just identify, that the stuff that anybody's read, but you want to talk about the significance of, let's say, that character or an object like a tesseract, um, you know, for what goes on in the story. In this case, it has to do a lot with the way the poor are really, really hit hard, or careers, things like, I'll pick those kinds of things, and then you'll give the responses to them. Now, the second part of the exam is an essay question, and I'll give you an idea of them. What you could write on basically 2.5 pages, double spaced, and you'll be able to return to that essay as many times as you want during the allotted time for the exam, okay? So there's 2 parts to it. And I'll make another short video later on in the week that will give you pretty much an idea of which prompts there are. So look over the essays from Ella Enchanted, I believe, is a novel that we read in the regular class. It's a fairy tale. You may have seen the horrible movie, but look and get a feel for um, what makes a good response. And this will help you when you write your paper. And I've given you some ideas about them, the kinds of things that you can do for the paper. So pay attention, and I'll send you an email when various videos are available. You'll take a quiz this week, as you usually do. But you have a new book, which happens every week. And the new book, I think you're going to enjoy a lot. What we might say, serious humor. Um, uh, and so you'll have a lot of fun, I think, and I look forward to reading what you have to say on the discussion threads, and I'm glad that I'm not going to be flying all over the place anytime soon. It all worked out quite well um, uh, from Morocco once I got everything squared away. Still no baggage, but we're hoping. Okay, enjoy a good week.